Hi, and welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, Parenting Insights from Pediatrician Moms. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. Welcome back.
Welcome back. We are going to tackle a topic today, a parents under pressure topic about special education and children with learning disabilities.
This is going to be a high level 20-minute or so primer in how to start thinking about special education for your child if and when you have concerns.
Great, let's jump in.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
Okay, so after either the teacher or the parent has suspicions of learning disability or needs for special education and the full and individual evaluation is complete, what are the next steps? What can parents expect after that when having the meeting with the school and the teachers?
Yeah, so we talked about that once that evaluation is complete, the school needs to schedule a meeting to discuss the results within 30 days. And in Texas, that meeting is called an ARD, which is our admission, review, dismissal. An ARD. That is not the name that's used in other states. In other states, it might be referred to as the meeting of the IEP team or meeting of the special education team. But for simplicity for this discussion, I'm going to refer to that meeting as an ARD. So the ARD committee, it's a group of people, including the parent, that are going to come together. And on the initial ARD meeting, we're talking about the A piece, the admission. Did the child qualify for admission into special education? We're going to continue to have ARD meetings throughout this child's special education journey, but most of years they're going to be review. We're reviewing their special education journey. And at some point, when their goals have been met, we're going to have an ARD meeting that's to discuss dismissal. Like maybe they no longer qualify for special education services. That would certainly be our goal. So anyway, all that to say, that's why you hear the term thrown around of the ARD meeting. Did you have an ARD? When is your ARD? Have you had an ARD? That's what it stands for, admission, review, and dismissal. And the ARD committee is going to involve a whole group of people. It generally involves somebody, administrator from the school, anybody that was involved in the evaluation. That can be the psychologist, that can be the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, anyone on the team that evaluated the child. It will also involve the teacher or teachers, and it will involve the parent, and then it will involve the special education coordinator or people that are also representing the special education department at the school. All of those people are going to come together to review with the parent the FIE and the results, and then as a group decide if the child qualifies for special education services and how to proceed.
Okay. Is the FIE review and the ARD, are they the same meeting or are they two separate meetings?
Yeah, it's the same. So ARD, anytime there's a meeting with the special education to consider special education services, it's called an ARD. That's just the lingo.
Sure.
We're
So
scheduling the ARD.
so the very first one, the ARD is scheduled to review the full and individual evaluation, but subsequent ARDs may be to assess whether or not they need a review of their special education services or they've no longer need special education. So the first ARD reviews the FIE, but subsequent ARDs do other things. Correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Once a child's enrolled in special education, they're going to have regular meetings at least once a year where that group of people, not the psychologists, not the people that did the testing, but the teachers, the special education department, the parents are going to sit down, go over all of the ways this child is getting services for their learning disability in this case, and decide if anything needs to be changed. So this meeting is going to be a regular occurrence in this child's education.
We talked about the mandate of the 60 days for the evaluation and the 30 days for the meeting. Is there a mandate for the interval between each ARD, or is that just set based on the needs of the child?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So every child in special education is required to have an annual ARD. So again, going back to IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it does mandate that any child in special education requires an annual ARD. But this is another important thing for parents to know. A parent can call an ARD at any time.
Mm,
So, let's say my child starts, I don't know, seventh grade, and they're now at a higher level of math, and they've already been diagnosed with a learning disability. And I'm seeing a huge discrepancy in their ability and what they're doing with how the leap between sixth and seventh to math. I could call an ARD and then we will meet again and say, hey, I think we need to change services for math.
mm.
Can we go over what's being done for math for this child and potentially make changes, right? So a parent has the right to call an ARD at any point.
Is there an interval where reassessment needs to take place by?
Yeah, yeah. So when a child qualifies for special education, they will qualify for 3 years at a minimum. So
Okay.
every 3 years is when a reevaluation occurs. There are some situations where if the parent and the school agree that the reevaluation is not necessary, they can just qualify that child for another 3 years. But every
Mhm.
3 years, that question comes up of retesting. And the child is always entitled to the retesting, but it does require time out of class. So there might be situations where a parent would say, I know my child's going to continue to qualify for dyslexia or for whatever learning disability. I don't want them pulled from class for the testing. Let's just qualify them for another 3 years. Okay, so when this initial ARD meets to go over the FIE, the psychologist is going to go through step by step what they discovered in each round of testing and every interview and every observation in the classroom. They're going to go over all of that. And then there are criteria that need to be met to decide if this child actually has a learning disability. If those criteria are not met, then the child cannot be enrolled in special education. So you have to qualify to get these services. Every parent should be happy if their child doesn't qualify, right? It's nice for them to perform well on these tests and to know. But if you suspect learning disability, in some ways it's a relief when they do qualify because now we've just opened the door for lots of services that are free to the child that are provided as special education services to the child.
Do you ever see where they don't meet a threshold of special education services, but some other services are given?
Yeah, so for example, most schools have different reading groups.
Mhm,
All of the schools are doing some type of testing, whether it's internal to the school or statewide, that is monitoring a child's reading progress.
mhm,
And most of those are set up where there's flags of, hey, a child didn't meet the standard that we expect on this annual or biannual testing that we do for reading groups, and have systems in place to put them in a different reading group or give them extra attention with reading, if that makes sense. It's hard to
mhm,
speak about that like globally because it's not necessarily a nationally mandated thing. For example, I could talk more about in Texas with the STAR and if you fail the STAR and what happens. And it does not necessarily mean that you have a learning disability, but it does trigger extra reading help, a certain number of hours of extra reading help, or it may trigger a certain number of hours of summer school for your child as well that you can opt into. You can be given extra help or services without actually qualifying to be a part of the special education program.
right.
Okay.
Well,
So
that's
I
good to
think of
know.
it as if you have suspicion that your child's going to cross that threshold for crossing into special education through the diagnosis of a learning disability, then it really opens up a lot of options for ways that the school can proceed and intervene and give
Mhm,
even more help.
right. No, that's good to clarify, thank you.
So, in our first episode on special education, if you remember, we talked about what might prompt a parent to think that their child needs to be assessed for special education services. We talked about what that evaluation process looks like. We just spent the first half of this episode talking about the special education committee and how often they meet and what that meeting looks like. Let's now turn our attention to a very broad overview of what services a special education department at a school can offer. So there are 2 different types of plans. One of them is a 504 and one of them is an IEP. Have you heard these terms, Sylvia?
I have heard these terms before, yeah.
Yes. Okay. And it's again, I feel like the names are very confusing. So 504 is named such because it's actually referring to Section 504 of an act that was passed back in the 70s, which
Mhm.
just provides civil rights protections to all individuals with disabilities and programs that receive federal funding, which includes public schools. So you
Mhm.
could have a child, for example, with a diagnosis of ADHD that does not qualify as special education, but does need services or
Mm.
modifications in the classroom, and then they have a 504. And that's sort of a separate path. With schools will have a 504 coordinator, and that's where we're talking about things like, let's give them extra time on testing, let's do small group testing, let them have some kind of fidget to play with their hands in class. There's all kinds of in classroom assistance or modifications that can happen on a 504 to accommodate children with some of the diagnosis, and there's some overlap. So this is where it gets tricky, but you'll hear the term 504.
Okay.
And just to state that again so that's clear, schools will have a 504 coordinator, a program developed for supporting students that have a 504 that is separate from the special education department to accommodate students that require 504 services but didn't qualify as special education. And I think it would be great for us to do an episode sometime that is specific to the 504 and probably specific to the 504 and ADHD, since that's the majority of kids that we take care of that are on a 504. But for the sake of learning disabilities, when a child is diagnosed by their FIE, they meet the criteria that they have a learning disability, they now go into the special education group and
Mhm.
they now get what's called an IEP. So here's our
Mhm.
other acronym that's important to know when you're navigating special education. So IEP stands for an individualized education program. And that is required for every child who qualifies under IDEA for special education. And the IEP is going to specify the services needed to fulfill the child's right to a free and appropriate public education, FAPE. That's another acronym that comes up in this. And the goal for special education is to figure out subject by subject how to fulfill this child's needs in what's termed the least restrictive environment.
Mhm.
Right? So if you think of most restrictive as we're going to pull this child out of the classroom all day and they're going to be within the special education department in a small group, that would be the most restrictive setting. Least restrictive would be, what can we do within the realms of their IEP that has them in the classroom learning the same material as
Their peers.
alongside their peers, right?
Yeah.
Alongside other students. And just to make a very broad summary of this, that generally will fall into a couple of different categories. So one could be having a special education teacher go into the classroom during math time, for example, and give this child assistance with math. So they're going to have a helper alongside them while they're in their math time. And that often on an IEP will be something like for 15 minutes, 3 days a week, or whatever is laid out by the ARD committee. There will be somebody in the classroom helping this child with this learning disability stay on classroom level with their math. Or it could be, this child needs more support than that. We're actually going to pull them out of the classroom during math time, and they're
Mhm.
going to be in a small group math class with the special education department that is geared towards their level for math, right? To help with their learning disability. With dyslexia, for example, it might be, instead of them doing their classroom reading time, they're getting pulled 4 days a week for their specific dyslexia course, which
Mm.
most schools will use some type of dyslexia course that has a different trajectory, a different focus on how they're teaching to read, and you work through different levels to qualify as getting through the dyslexia course.
Yeah. When sometimes I hear the word one-on-one, what is a one-on-one? Is that the special education teacher assistant? And the other thing is called pull out. Those are the terms that we use in our area, where they get pulled
Okay.
out for certain things and they get a
Yeah.
one-on-one for others, right?
Okay. So the most common time I hear the term one-on-one is regard to an aid or a support assigned to a student in special education who needs help. It could be with behavior management
Mm.
or needs that level of help with academic tasks. They need to be one-on-one. The term I hear is push in, where the special education department will push into the classroom. And that doesn't have to be one-on-one. That could be hey, I'm coming into the classroom for math. I have these 3 students. I'm going to be rotating around between the students, watching what they're doing, watching their notes that they're taking, answering their questions, right?
Right.
So
Okay.
the one-on-one, I think of that as tends to be more of an aid for a child that behaviorally needs more constant attention. That's not always
Okay.
true. I'm speaking very general on this, but that's
No, no. That's good to clarify.
the pull out. You're not going to stay on grade level for math. For example, we're going to pull you out and
Right.
you're going to have a resource math class with the special education department, probably with a small group of students that are on your level, and
Right.
you're going to learn together at the pace that's appropriate for you.
Mhm. Got it. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
So, I just want to take a moment to highlight the resources that parents might have. And I would point you to the American Academy of Pediatrics webpage, healthychildren.org. And I'll put a link in to this page in the show notes, where this is a really good introductory page talking about the individualized education plan and the 504 plan, a guide for parents. Basically, the summary is as a parent, you know your child best. If you have concerns about how your child talks, acts, moves, plays, or learns, don't wait to raise them. Acting early can make a huge difference in your child's success in school and in life. So, this kind of encourages parents to be an active participant in evaluating and looking at your child. Basically, this site does a very good job, first, of kind of defining what an IEP is and what a 504 is. And they talk about which plan does what, and they have a really great table on this webpage talking about children who need support, but not necessarily specialized instruction. That's not an IEP, that's a 504. So they kind of have this table that really goes through a lot of those details that help make it clear to parents who are trying to advocate for your kids. What does my child need right now? They define that process of IEP, how to request an IEP or a 504, how to go about meeting with the school administrator, teachers, and school psychologists, and what that is in an IEP. And then it talks about how to adjust the IEP or 504. If you feel like the plan isn't working for your child in school, how do you advocate for your child in changing that plan or adjusting that plan? So I highly recommend parents starting off, just check out this webpage and learn what the American Academy of Pediatrics has to say.
Yeah, that's a really good resource to point out. It kind of gives you in writing a lot of the things that we've just talked about.
Yeah.
So I like pointing parents to that as well. Yeah. So when I think about some concluding points, again, I apologize. This is really just the tip of the iceberg. This can be very overwhelming for parents, although it is much nicer to have the 20 minutes instead of the 2 minutes in the office to kind of go over this. But the first point I would make is we alluded to this in the beginning. I would never turn down services that my child qualified for. If the teacher thinks that they need to be tested, I would absolutely jump on it because all it can do is open up more doors for options for what that child can do. It then gives you a lot of flexibility as the parent as you're going into these ARDs. We talked about this regular meeting to say, hey, I would really like my child to get more in-classroom help for math or to be pulled for math, or I keep using math as an example because it's a little bit more concrete. And it just allows you as the parent, if they qualify, it allows you as the parent to be present at the table making these decisions about your child's education, which
Right.
is uncommon. You don't
Yeah.
generally get the privilege of doing that. So I would never turn down the services. The other thing I would say is, according to data from the National Education Association, 15 to 20% of public school students in the US receive special education services. So this is not the one child in the classroom who is labeled as the special ed kid, right? This is very common. That's 1 in 6, 1 in 5. And I hope that our culture, because it's so common, it's more and more being normalized. I know there's still far way to go on that. So I think because of the high number, that there's a decreasing stigma surrounding these types of disabilities, which I think is good because hopefully that's just opening up the services to more children that need them. The point that I'll make is that we do know in all of pediatrics, children have this wonderful neuroplasticity. And so if in those beginning years of elementary school, first, second, third grade, if we're starting to see signs that make us concerned about learning disability, it's so great to catch them then because Z are just capable of taking information and rewiring even some of that brain connectivity in ways that change as we go into adulthood. So there's just so much hope around this early intervention and intervention of services. And again, go back to the point of if I have a child that I'm concerned about or that I think would qualify for services, I would absolutely pursue this.
Absolutely.
The second thing that I like to always tell to parents when you have a child that has qualified for special education services, remember these teachers are now the best advocates for your child, and
Mhm.
they are doing an incredibly hard job. I
Yes.
mean, when I think about things that are in need in the world and jobs that are very demanding and underpaid, teachers is really high on the list. And I have said many times, if I really wanted to make the world a better place, I think I would have raised all of my children to be teachers. And I'm not sure I'm going to raise any of them to be teachers, but these people need to be advocating for my child as much as I want to advocate for my child. And I am always approaching those meetings with such incredible gratitude for what they were doing. In fact, I remember when my child that I got tested in first going into second grade, when she was tested, when she qualified as dyslexia, and I had been homeschooling her and had been noticing this difficulty in teaching her to read. I remember going into my first ARD meeting ever as a parent, going into that ARD meeting, them going over the FIE and the special education coordinator looking at me and saying, she's qualified as dyslexia, and what all of that means is that it is my job now to teach her to read. And I literally was ready to burst into tears and hug that woman because I had been trying so hard and I didn't have the tools to do it. And I was having such a hard time doing it. So that thought of passing that torch to somebody else who can now advocate for my child in a very informed way, who actually knows what they're doing, was just the best feeling in the world as a parent. So I just cannot say it enough. Please, please, please respect that these teachers are working every year with less staff and more demands, and they have a very, very hard job. So I always like to remind them of that when I go into an ARD.
Yeah. No, this has been such a great introduction to special education information for parents on where to begin and what does this all mean. So I really appreciate you sharing your personal story and experience today.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, my two with dyslexia have now been years into their services at school. They're both really great readers on grade level. And what is even more important to me than that, though, is that they both actually choose to read as a hobby. And I think kids obviously are very much at risk of being very frustrated by reading and always being told that they're not good at it and everything reinforcing that they're not good at it. And to get to that point where they enjoy reading enough to choose it to do on their own as a parent is just, I'm just very thankful to the
Yeah.
teachers and the services they received.
Having dyslexic children enjoy reading, that's a testament to the special educators, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. This has been a really enlightening discussion for me, and I think it will help me offer better care to the patients that I see in my practice. So thank you, Vivian. This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.